Welcome to the Three Championship Drive podcast on YouTube, hosted by me, Lance Caporossi. Follow me on X at Lance Caporossi, the same way you see it spelled on the screen. And check out the Three Championship Drive podcast on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And do me a favor, tell a Pistons fan. All right, we have an Isaiah Stewart update on the whole situation. He could be available to play this Thursday, February 22nd against the Indiana Pacers. I don't know if the Pistons want him to after the whole Benedict Mathurin and Jaden Ivey thing. He might really want to have Jaden Ivey's back in this game. And, he might be looking for heads and looking to make him roll this Thursday. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So back to the story. Isaiah Stewart does have a court date, which is February 23rd, in which he doesn't have to be physically there because his lawyer will represent him. If Isaiah Stewart is found guilty of the misdemeanor assault, he'll most likely have to pay a small fine and he wouldn't serve any jail time. Still no word on whether the league will suspend him. I'm guessing the league is going to wait until the hearing is over and then they will review everything and make a decision based on what they discover about the whole incident. I'm guessing he'll probably, I want to say like 4 games at a minimum. And that might be crazy to some fans listening to it. I would probably say anywhere from like 4 to 10 games, which really does suck because the Pistons do need Isaiah Stewart. He's definitely a help on defense. But look, you punched another player in the tunnel before a game started. Doesn't matter why you punched him. It's just you did punch him. So you're going to be facing a suspension, unfortunately. And yeah, you just got to learn to control that temper. Leave it all on the floor. Like you can hit players, just make sure it's on the floor. Then they don't really care. And they're just going to let you go on about your day. It's not a big deal. But yeah, Isaiah Stewart, as soon as I learn more about this, like I will update people as soon as I possibly can. I mean, like I'm like the last person that gets this information. I get it just like everybody else. If you're on X and you see one of the beat writers post it, that's when I get it. Anyways, Isaiah Stewart might be able to play against the Indiana Pacers. That would be just a wild sequence of events. Getting arrested. Luckily, he didn't serve any jail time. Apparently, he was never actually even placed in the cell. But to go through all of that and then to be able to play Thursday night and then potentially face a suspension, just a wild sequence. And hopefully, it all goes good for Isaiah Stewart. Tyrese Haliburton has been awfully vocal about the Detroit Pistons passing on him during the 2020 NBA draft. He was being interviewed by Taylor Rooks of Bleacher Report when she asked out of all the teams that passed on him, which one felt the most personal, and he said the Detroit Pistons. He says he knew the Pistons needed point guards and he felt like he was the best point guard in the draft. He also says there's added juice when he plays the Detroit Pistons. I don't know about you guys, but I do love his confidence as a player. And that's exactly what you want from a point guard. Unfortunately, he happens to play in the Central Division for the Indiana Pacers, and that extra juice happens like 4 times a year. So that part does suck. But man, it's just like you can't hate on a player like Tyrese Haliburton. Like the confidence is just unreal. It matches on the court, it matches with his clothing as well. But Tyrese Haliburton playing with that extra juice. I believe most GMs thought he was going to be drafted by the Atlanta Hawks because he does have great size. He could have played off the ball, could have played on the ball. Very smart, high IQ player. Him and Trae Young would have been a nightmare for the Atlanta Hawks in the Eastern Conference. And I'm so glad it didn't happen for the Atlanta Hawks. I'm glad they went with a Kongwu. I mean, he's been playing great for them, but just to have Tyrese Haliburton and Trae Young, the thought of it and how they could have potentially ran the Eastern Conference. I'm so glad Atlanta, passed on them. Now, every mock draft I looked at had Tyrese Haliburton going number 6. I actually found more mock drafts that had Killian Hayes falling out of the top 10 than Tyrese Haliburton not going to the Atlanta Hawks. I mean, I think if you look back on it now, he's probably 1 or 2. He's going 1 or 2. It depends on how you feel about Anthony Edwards. It is odd that every team passed on Tyrese Haliburton before Sacramento selected him. Those were really dumb decisions because there is no excuse because he was the most complete player to come out that year. I mean, everything those mock drafts and those experts say about him, there's almost no weakness. His weakness was pull up jumping and running a pick and roll offense like that, and like he was skinny. That's it. I mean, most players that do come into the NBA, they are pretty skinny. Eventually their bodies do fill out when you're working with a professional nutritionist and a strength and conditioning coach at that level, the bodies will fill out. But it was just those weaknesses don't even really mean anything. Like he was in the 99th percentile for spot up shooting. He was described as being able to make every single pass on the floor, just being able to efficiently run an offense. Like there was no complaints about this guy, and it's surprising that this many teams passed on him. And looking back on those mock drafts, even though a lot of experts were high on Killian Hayes, almost all of them pointed out to his weaknesses, and it really makes you wonder how a guy who was described as extremely left-handed dominant to the point that it's actually a problem in his ability to make plays. I'm wondering why he was mocked so high because he literally I mean, he could dribble with his right hand, but not to a high enough level to where experts and scouts pointed out and said, if that's not worked out, if he doesn't develop a right hand, he's going to be extremely limited on what he can do in the NBA. But yet, for some reason, he was mocked to the Pistons in almost every mock draft. Like I said, there was just a few of them that had him outside of the top 10, but he was extremely loved by scouts. And I guess it points to, some guys look more towards the potential versus like the actual on the court stuff. Because if we just paid attention to what Killian Hayes couldn't do and actually paid attention to those weaknesses, I think Troy Weaver would have made a different draft selection back in 2020. Now, I would have loved for the Pistons to draft Haliburton, even though I was a Killian Hayes fan. It really did come down to Tyrese Haliburton and Killian Hayes for me, and I gave the edge to Killian Hayes because I fell in love with the player comparisons. I mean, NBA.com, and they pulled their comparisons from like The Ringer, Sports Illustrated, CBS, a bunch of different ones, and that's how they calculated where he would go in their mock draft. But those player comparisons were James Harden, D'Angelo Russell, and Manu Ginobili for Killian Hayes. And then for Tyrese Haliburton, it was Lonzo Ball, Shea Gillis Alexander, Michael Carter Williams, and Sean Livingston. So, yeah, the comps were a little weird, but I think like most fans, I fell in love with the potential of Killian Hayes being James Harden or even a Manu Ginobili. And in worst case scenario, D'Angelo Russell. I don't know who you compare Killian Hayes now to, and those comps just seem so far off because even when you go watch Killian Hayes on his German team, Ulm, it just seems like I don't know how you get those comparisons. I mean, I guess if you're just looking like, yeah, he's a lefty, he's 6'5", and he's more known to be a playmaker. I mean, those are the three things that he has with all those other players, but everything else, like, there's nothing that suggests he would be any of those 3. So, would Tyrese Haliburton be a two-time All-Star if he played on the Detroit Pistons? This was this has been floating around a little bit on social media, and it bothers me just a little bit because, one, there's no way to know how Tyrese Haliburton would have played for the Detroit Pistons. I do believe no matter what, that there are certain players that no matter the environment they're in, they're going to thrive. I think Tyrese Haliburton is that. I mean, you got to think he was drafted by Sacramento. They already had a franchise point guard in De'Aaron Fox. He didn't have to change his game too much, but he had to change his game where he was going to be more off the ball. He wasn't going to be running the show, and he thrived. And I believe he was third in Rookie of the Year. And then his second year in the league, he was Sacramento's most valuable trade asset, which eventually netted them an all-star in Sabonis, where he was averaging, I think, 14 and 7 in shooting 41, I believe 41% from the three. He hasn't shot below 45% from the field. I mean, this dude is just incredibly efficient on a basketball floor. I don't think any player has came into the league as efficient as Tyrese Haliburton. I really do wish I could look into like a crystal ball and see the other basketball universes and see how drafting Tyrese Haliburton would have went for the Pistons. I'm confident the Pistons wouldn't have gone 3 straight years drafting in the top 5 if they had drafted Tyrese Haliburton over Killian Hayes. I don't believe they would have got the number 1 overall pick. I do believe Tyrese Haliburton would have raised the floor of that Pistons team that featured Jeremy Grant, Mason Plumlee, Derrick Rose for a few games, Blake Griffin for a few games. I do believe he would have raised that floor where the Pistons would not have been the team picking number 1 overall. I still believe they would have been picking somewhere in the top 5, probably later at that end. I think they probably would have tried to pair Jalen Suggs with Tyrese Haliburton, and that would be a very interesting backcourt for the Pistons. I don't know if Pistons fans would love that, but that's just me looking into the imaginary crystal ball in front of me and checking out those other basketball uniforms. I don't believe Jaden Ivey would be here. I do think Troy Weaver would have went in different directions with those drafts. You wouldn't have had to go so many, you wouldn't have to have taken so many guards. But I think guys that we wish were more in play at that time really would have been in play with Tyrese Haliburton as a Detroit Piston. I mean, it is kind of cool to think about like Cade and Tyrese Haliburton in the backcourt. I just don't think it would have happened. I think he would have shown enough his rookie year where the basketball god said, "Look, you got your franchise player. We're not going to bless you with Cade Cunningham. It's just not going to happen. You're going to get a top 5 pick. You're just not getting Cade to pair with Tyrese Haliburton. That would just be way too unfair." And yeah, that's just what I think would happen. I just think the Pistons would be better. I think this restoring would have happened. Maybe we get a few more seasons of Dwayne Casey as the head coach. It could have just created a whole new universe out there for the Detroit Pistons. And would it, maybe we would be the 6th seed versus the Indiana Pacers. Maybe they don't trade Jeremy Grant. Maybe Mason Plumlee and Kelly Olynyk are still here, getting minutes at the 5 spot for the Pistons. I don't know. I just think everything would have been completely different. There was one person I was talking to that thinks even with Tyrese Haliburton as the point guard for the Detroit Pistons, everything would have played out the exact same way. Cade would have been drafted number 1 overall Detroit. They still would have went with Jaden Ivey. They still trade and get Duran, and they still draft Asar Thompson, which I think is crazy. I don't think with Tyrese Haliburton as your point guard, you go for, you know, 3 years of drafting top 5. I'm gonna say it again. I just don't believe that happens with Tyrese Haliburton as the point guard. But I wanna hear your guys' thoughts. Feel free to drop them in the comments below. I would love to read about what you guys have to think of Tyrese Haliburton being a Detroit Pistons. Do you think they still make all the same draft selections, or do you think Detroit Pistons basketball is different with Tyrese Haliburton at the helm of the franchise? So Kevin Ali, he becomes the Brooklyn Nets head coach, the interim head coach. Is going to get the rest of the season. This is important because he was a candidate become the Detroit Pistons head coach this past offseason. According to reports, Kevin Ali was Troy Weaver's guy, and this might have led to Troy Weaver drafting Asar Thompson, who was coached by Kevin Ali in the Overtime Elite League. Kevin Ali was a developmental coach. You can go see the videos. He was always working with Asar Thompson, and that actually does make sense. Why not draft a guy that is familiar with your potential head coach, where the head coach is like, "Look, I've worked with this guy for a few years. I know his strengths. I know his weaknesses. I've been, fantasizing and scheming and drawing up plays to make him an effective NBA player. I can do it." Unfortunately, we did get Monty Williams. Now, before I move on, I just want to say I was not on the Kevin Ali hype train like apparently every other Pistons fan was. I wanted Charles Lee, and the reason I wanted Charles Lee is because he was coming over from a system in Milwaukee where they were starting 2 bigs. Now, one of them was Giannis, the other one was Brook Lopez, but they were also factoring in Bobby Portis in there, and that three-headed monster was real effective. And I thought from all the reports we were hearing, well, the Pistons are going to try to go 2 bigs. Let's get a young, fresh coach that's coming from a system that has utilized 2 bigs and has had success with them and knows how to have success using a two big lineup. That's why I wanted Charles Lee. I am just here to admit I did not want Kevin Ali as the head coach. I didn't even really want Asar Thompson to be drafted by the Pistons because I had absolutely no faith in the overtime elite league. And Asar's made me eat my own words. Kevin Ali just became the interim head coach. I did like him at UConn. I just know that jump from college to the NBA, it can be difficult. But then I also thought that jump from the overtime elite league to the NBA, it's like essentially you're going from high school basketball to the most the best league in the world in the NBA. I thought that was too big of a leap. Even if you were working with really good standout prospects like they do with the overtime elite league, I just thought it was too big of a jump for Kevin Ali to make. Now, again, like I said, I liked him at UConn, but I didn't really know much about him as a coach. And according to some of the stuff I read, he's a great motivator. That's something that is a skill of his. Like he can get the most out of guys, and his reputation as a developmental coach really stands out. And that's a great reputation that he carries with him. I think he's going to be great for the Brooklyn Nets. They got an interesting team over there full of, they're led by Mikal Bridges. Who knows if he's a first option, but I'm curious and I'm excited for Kevin Ali because I hope it does work out because then Tom Gores will have to admit his mistake. He'll have to bite the bullet. We'll probably see Monty Williams. I don't want to say fired, but I don't believe I think he might get 3 years in Detroit, but if Kevin Ali finds success with the Brooklyn Nets, I'm willing to go out a limb and say that Monty Williams' tenure in Detroit will be shorter just because Tom Gores will hopefully have to step back and say, "You know what, Troy? You were right. We should have brought in your guy. I'm gonna get rid of Monty, and I'm gonna let you do the coaching hire, and I'm just gonna stay out of it." That's why I hope Kevin Ali finds success with the Brooklyn Nets because, again, just to say it, Tom Gores hopefully admits his mistake, takes a step back, and then lets Troy Weaver do his job. And I want to see Troy Weaver do his job without any interference from the owner. I want less cooks in the kitchen. I want Troy Weaver to be the chef and build something in Detroit and hopefully build it the way he believes it should be built. Now, he's already GM'd through a few mistakes. He's admitted those mistakes. Hopefully, he's learned from them and hopefully, given the real opportunity to build this team the way he thinks it can be, he'll finally get that. And I all believe that has to have to do with Kevin Ali finding success with the Brooklyn Nets. Thank you guys for listening to the Three Championship Drive podcast. Do me a favor, go to Google, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe. After you subscribe, leave a review, drop a rating, but more importantly, tell a Pistons fan